Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another town hall. Today's town hall will have a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion. So we appreciate you for joining us. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Ray Balknight, Director of Communications. Thank you again for joining us for another town hall. This town hall will have a special emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion, which remains a key focus for our department. You might recall that earlier this year, we participated in the Government Alliance Race and Equity Survey, the GARE survey. We're happy to share that we have the results of this survey, and so we will be providing the results during this town hall, in addition to discussing the actions that the DEI Council is taking. And lastly, there's going to be a session of Q&A. We asked many of you to submit questions, and so we have members of the DEI Council on hand to respond to those questions. Before we jump into the results, we also have Director Gordon here, who's going to provide some opening remarks as well as closing remarks. Director Gordon?
Great. Thank you, Ray, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are well. I hope your families and loved ones are well. Excited for today's conversation. Before we get into the real meat of today around DEI, just a minute of a public health update. I think we talked a couple months ago about how after a long decline, cases were coming back up. And happy to report that in recent weeks, that has stabilized. It's possible we're seeing an increase again, but for the moment, it has largely stabilized. That again is a tribute to extraordinary work around the department. If you look by region, there is significant variation, and it's not necessarily what you would expect. The highest rates of COVID are in the Detroit region, but within that broad region, actually Detroit City is doing quite well. And it's really the suburbs around Detroit, in particular Macomb County, that have had higher rates. So it's very variable what we're seeing. Extraordinary work across the department by the public health team, by all of us to deal with this. Numbers of tests. A few months ago, we set a goal of testing 2% of the population. It seemed crazy, 2% a week, crazy, far out of reach. We're basically there. We're testing 30,000 people a day. That is an incredible tribute to the work of people across the department. We're in the top 10 states in per capita testing. Again, it's been amazing work. Tracing work is accelerating. And one of the reasons we have successfully been able to contain COVID quite well compared to the states around us, to most states in the country, has been a tremendous emphasis on wearing masks and there's been great work done across the department. Orders around masks, communications around masks, which Ray has been leading, and then a different group of folks have worked on distributing masks, and we have now distributed or are distributing more than 4 million masks free to communities where there's a risk that folks won't be able to afford them or won't be able to find them. So big emphasis on access in Detroit, getting delivery to homeless shelters, to bodegas, to Indian organizations, really anywhere where we think there can be risk. DHHS offices, all of us now are able to make, or soon will be able to make masks available. Folks can call and they can come in and get one. So it's one more bit of exciting work that's really not just exciting here, but a model around the country. I talked earlier today on a conference call with the former CDC director that was spotlighting this very work. So lots of great work. And we'll see what happens now. We're obviously at significant risk with kids coming back to school, with colleges coming back, but tremendous work has gone into minimizing the number of bumps that we face. And I want to thank all of you for that work. And now I want to turn to the main topic for the day, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is something that a team across department, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, has really been driving on this and pushing on this, with involvement from dozens, if not hundreds of people across the department, and pushing on it, before I got here. I want to say that it's been a deep and profound focus. I think after what happened in the spring with George Floyd, after what happened with COVID and the tremendous racial inequities in its distribution, I felt as a leader, of course, a need to double down and say, this has to be core to everything that we are doing. And part of making it core is talking about it not just once, but again and again and again. And that's one of the reasons we are here today. One of the things that we will talk about today is a survey that we did working with GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And it's a survey to look at how we doing? Because I think if you want to improve, you first have to know where you are, and got a tremendous response to that. Almost 6,000 people responded to that survey. And so members of the DEI Council will be talking about the results of that survey. One of the points of focus in that survey, and one of our points of focus, we talk broadly about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but of course there's a particular focus on racial inequity. And we've talked in the past about why that is. I don't think there's a huge need to explain why that is. Sadly, you only have to look across Lake Michigan and see what is going on in Wisconsin today, and with the shooting of an African-American man, Jacob Blake, in the back, and say we have a lot to do as a society, and we have a lot to do as a department. So there is a particular focus on race, on systemic racism, about the ways we in the department unknowingly perpetuate it and what we can do to address it and dismantle it. Talk about some specific things that I have been involved in helping to move along. One is that we are going to establish a new Office of Equity, a higher level office reporting to Elizabeth Hertel that brings together a lot of the work on DEI that we do today. And my hope will be that with that positioning, we're able to move work more quickly, better connect it, and move it forward more ambitiously and aggressively. So that is an exciting piece. More detail to come on that. We've asked each administration, all senior deputies, to identify one or two major initiatives related to racial equity that they can drive. And these are initiatives designed to reduce disparities in Michigan. So they should have measurable outcomes that we can look to and achieve. And so I'm excited about getting those focal points for our work. MDHHS will be piloting and developing, piloting on behalf of the state, because it's something that the whole state is interested in using. And this is a moment for me to talk about the important works of the Racial Diversity Task Force led by Lieutenant Governor Gilchrist. They've obviously given a huge amount of new energy government-wide to addressing inequities. And one thing that they announced and that we are piloting is the use of an equity impact assessment tool aimed at getting bias as much as we can out of our decision making and focusing on listening to the communities we serve and getting measurable results. working with them. And that's one that actually was developed in connection with the Government Alliance on Race and Equity that I mentioned. So we will talk more about all of these things in this conversation. I want to say thanks ahead of time to all the members of the DEI Council you're going to be hearing from. We want this to be an honest conversation. We want it to be a difficult conversation. I think if these conversations aren't difficult, they're not real. But I hope that it will be, and we'll look forward to it, and we'll be back at the end to close us out.
Great. Thank you, Director Gordon. We are now going to turn to the discussion around the GARE survey results, discussing the purpose, some highlights, and where you can find the survey results, which we've already released through Hope Weekly earlier this week. I'd like to introduce to you Brenda Jegede, the manager of the Office of Equity and Minority Health, and she's going to walk us through the results. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you, Ray, and good afternoon, everyone. And again, just Brenda Jegede, and I have the pleasure of leading the Culture and Climate Action Team with Shelly Morrell and Terry Mooney. Want to go through some of these slides very expeditiously. I wanted to include some main takeaways, but as Ray said, the information is posted to the DEI Council intranet page. But in general, wanted to just review the purpose of the survey. Definitely was an opportunity to engage and see what's our readiness as employees of the department in terms of race equity activities, also our understanding of key concepts, and just our understanding of actual activities that's taking place within our work areas, our divisions, within the department as a whole, and then also within the community. Just very critical to have some baseline assessment, specifically to know, how we're doing in terms of assessing our impact and the interventions that we're incorporating, and just wanting to make sure to see how we're making a difference in our DEI plan. I wanted to provide just a general brief overview of GARE, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. It is a part of an organization called Race Forward, and Race Forward's mission is to transform institutions and partner with communities to move policy, culture, narrative for racial justice. And there's a large network of governmental entities across the country that comes together to work to achieve racial equity and to advance opportunities for everyone. There's over 200 members in 32 different states and 150 different cities. Most are at the local government level, but over the years there have been more that has been a part of the state level. And we do have a membership in GARE, and that membership allows us to have access to the GARE survey, and also provides us with some tools around incorporating equity into our work and access to resources like webinars and work groups. I wanted to share this definition of diversity, equity, and inclusion that GARE offers, where you could see diversity is looking to have just a variety of identities and cultures as a part of our organization, a group, or an initiative. And you could see where inclusion is about really just being fully able to engage and participate, I would say, in decision-making, to where there is some quality in terms of the experience and the ability to have input based on that diversity. And in terms of equity, we are looking at really taking into account what are the specific needs of a variety of racial and ethnic populations and other marginalized communities in terms of looking at our policies, our practices, our procedures, and how they're designed to ensure equitable outcomes. So our approach, we had our survey instrument that we use from GARE. Is a standardized set of questions that they use throughout the country, a same set of questions. We did add a few questions that was specific to diversity, equity, and inclusion. As we stated in our DI plan, we do have an intentional focus on race, but it's not an exclusive focus on race. So we wanted to prepare a few questions to establish a baseline that could also help us, more broadly address our DEI initiatives and goals. It was administered online. We did have, it went to both state staff and contractual staff, and the complete analysis was conducted by GARE. The survey results went to GARE. There was an opportunity to have some focus based on staff experiences, their knowledge, their opinions, also looking specifically at their work units, and then looking at the department as a whole in terms of being able to advance race equity. And then there was a question in terms of state government wide in terms of making decisions, making progress to advance equity. So our respondents, as the director said, we did pretty well. We had a 33% response rate. Pretty, okay, very happy with this first initiative of having, close to 5,700 people actually respond and being able to use close to 5,600 of those responses. We did get responses from each of our administrative areas. Based on statistics that we've heard within our department before, we were not surprised to see that 25% of staff stated that they had been with the department for 11 to 20 years. Over a quarter, about 8% stated that they were not in a management or supervisory position, and nearly 74%, or a little over 74%, were female in terms of gender. We did try to identify and get information on some other gender identities, but because of the sample size, we were not able to use and analyze that data. And then not included on this slide, but I wanted to mention that nearly 1 in 10 of our staff, close to 9%, indicated that they had a disability. In terms of race and ethnicity, we had 62% of our respondents that were white, non-Latinx. We had a quarter that identified as Black or African American, nearly 8% identified as multiracial, and then we had about 1.7% Asian, a little over 1% indicated that they were Latinx, 1% American Indian or Alaska Native, and then 0.1% Pacific Islander. And we were not able to include specific results on Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander because of the low percentage. So some good results, and maybe I think to some unexpected results, is that many of our staff did state that they were ready to engage in conversations around race equity, that they had a basic understanding of race equity concepts. 98% said that they had a basic understanding. However, there were only about 78% who said that they could identify examples of institutional racism. And as you can see on the slide, the definition of institutional racism was given, where it says when an organization, programs, or policies work better for white people than people of color, regardless of the intention. And among employees who indicated that they could identify examples of institutional racism, about half of them agreed that they had the tools that they needed to be able to do that within the workplace. And then you could see high percentage, 90% plus said that they thought it was valuable to examine and discuss the impacts of race. And then a majority said that they felt competent to in their interactions with people of other races. But less, only 83%, stated that they felt comfortable talking about race. And I don't think that's a surprise to many of us. In terms of institutionalized racism in the workplace by race, you can see that there were some differences in those responses. A larger percent of Black or African Americans indicated that they disagreed that they had the tools to address institutional racism in the workplace. And all of the responses by race and ethnicity had statistically significant differences. Next, you could see that 54% of our staff agreed that leadership communicates the importance of addressing racial inequities and achieving racial equity. And about the same percentage, half of the respondents agreed that their leadership participates in and supports discussion around race equity. In terms of resources, however, less than half agreed that their division provided resources for addressing racial disparities and achieving race equity. And staff stated, for example, 55% agreed that they were encouraged to participate in equity trainings and things like workshops, but only 45% stated that those opportunities training was provided to them. And then this slide, you can see that, again, there are statistically significant differences among the racial and ethnic groups. About half of respondents agreed that the department has made an explicit commitment to advancing race equity. But however, a lower percentage, 39%, indicated that they could identify one or more concrete actions within the department to address racial inequities. And then again, there are statistically significant differences among racial and ethnic groups in terms of how they respond to their ability to identify one or more concrete actions. We added a few questions, as I mentioned earlier, around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in that, we did ask respondents if they could identify instances within the department where discrimination or harassment has occurred. And as you could see, most frequently, people did state that they could identify discrimination or harassment, 42% based on age, and a third, 29%, based on disability, and you can see the other category. A little over half of the respondents agreed that they actively engaged in work around race equity, and 27% of staff responded that, you know, they think they would be more active if they had received training. A third said that they needed more information, and a quarter of respondents indicated that they needed more time to engage in race equity work. Well, those are some of our summary of our results. And I wanted to share a model that GARE works under and promotes in terms of strategy, a model for advancing race equity within organizations. So you can see here they they have it broken up into three areas in terms of normalizing, organizing, and operationalizing. And so just normalizing a shared understanding of key concepts around race equity. And then in terms of organizing, actually having an infrastructure to build expertise around race equity, and also possibly, you know, training of existing staff. And then once you have that in place, how are you operationalizing actual procedures or use of tools or guidance around how to incorporate equity into our work? One specific thing is looking at data. It really plays an important role in terms of having that baseline and then tracking goals, progress towards goals. Wanted to show a couple of examples where we have demonstrated or how staff responded in terms of our ability to organize efforts. They really spoke to efforts within their division. that were externally focused. And just a few highlights, many, 59% said they were working on providing language access services, specifically, some translation services. They were improving access for refugees and immigrants. 34% about agreed to that. And then about a third stated that they were seeking input and assistance on decision-making from communities of color. Operationalizing at the division level, about 45% of respondents stated that they did not know if their division had a race equity group. Only 11% indicated that they did have an equity action plan, and less than 5% stated that they used an equity tool to inform their decisions on policies, on budget decisions, programming. And then 76% of our staff stated that they did not know if their division used any tool. Wanted to briefly just highlight that there were opportunities for open-ended responses, and GARE did analyze those responses, and they categorized them into some themes. And these are 4 themes that we were able to that came out of those responses. So you could see them: hiring and promotion and tenure, policy, practices and procedures, leadership, and mainly, and the 4th was building awareness and narrative understanding. And mainly the responses were around where inequities exist or how to make improvements. There were comments in terms of leadership, in terms of not having leadership necessary manifest the behaviors that supported race equity. And then just a summary of our findings. Again, very happy to see that a high percentage of us do believe that examining race is important. There are results that are statistically significant in terms of differences by race and ethnicity, where many people of color and white people feel differently about the department's efforts around race. And then there were also statistically significant differences when it comes to supervisory status, where more so our supervisors agreed with, where they frequently agreed with statements about their respective division as compared to non-supervisors. So they were in more agreement than their staff was in terms of responses to some of the questions. So we do want to take these things into consideration. Many respondents did state that they lacked knowledge about activities within their area, and we want to work to make some improvements in that, and you'll hear about some of the activities soon. And then just coming up to like final comments, we wanted to see how we compared nationally with other organizations that took the survey. And in many ways, we were very similar to other local and state organizations where staff indicated definitely a willingness and readiness to engage in this work. So I think a lot of times we think no because it's difficult, it can be uncomfortable, but staff did show a willingness to engage in this work. And there were no surprises that there were differences in terms of experiences by race and ethnicity and supervisory status. But there were a couple of areas where our results were different than what GARE typically would see with other organizations. And the main 2 areas was that we had a high percentage of staff who just indicated a lack of knowledge of knowing about race equity activities, and less evidence in terms of an actual infrastructure and activities to organize around the work, and the use of tools, I would say, to guide the work. So that's something that you'll definitely hear more about now. We will post the survey results. We did include a summary of the results on our DEI intranet page, our DEI Council intranet page. That was a summary. There are some other reports in terms of by race and ethnicity, by gender, and by supervisory status. So we invite you to look at those results. They will be posted to the internet site soon. And now we'll have an opportunity to just hear more about some of the race equity, diversity, equity, inclusion work within our department that we have engaged in to increase our knowledge, to build an infrastructure for the work, and to operationalize some use of tools to guide our efforts. So I'll turn it over to Yesenia at this time.
Hello, everyone. Great afternoon. I have the great pleasure of serving as co-lead of training and professional development within the DI efforts. Next. So a little bit about the DI Council, and you'll hear a couple of us presenters talk about different components of it. So first, the DI committee, at once was called a committee, was formed in 2016 after the merger between community health and human services, with representation from all of the administrations within the department. The action there was really to unify efforts of diversity, equity, and inclusion happening at each of the two departments before the merger. The committee then was called Council soon after, and they developed very deliberately the DI plan, and were able to gain leadership approval in May of 2018. It was a very intentional process of almost 2 years. So definitely knowing that there was a lot of time put into this effort. The DI framework is definitely rooted in racial equity, and Brenda stated that already. We do have an intentional focus on race, but not exclusive, knowing that there are intersectional marginalized identities that we also address. The next thing I have here, if you haven't had an opportunity to read the DI plan, definitely take a look at it, and you will see that each of the action teams under the council have indicators for success. And these are some of the initial thoughts on measures that could drive our progress as an institution moving forward. The last point I would like to point out from the plan, and it's one of the concluding statements, is that this work is for all of us and by all of us. So addressing issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion really require us all, since systemic inequities cannot be eliminated by the actions of a few, and they're very complex. So we do encourage you all to participate with us in making this a successful endeavor for MDHHS moving forward in changing our culture and operations. The DI action teams definitely will take questions at the very end, but we wanted to highlight some of the latest and greatest achievements by each of the action teams, just as an example of the great work that is happening. And might I mention that all of these representatives, both at the council level and at the action team level, are volunteers. So we take our hats off for the ongoing effort, time, and sweat and tears put into this work. So to begin with, hiring, recruitment, and retention, they have a requirement of completing an implicit bias training for all interview panelists. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. As a second highlight for them, they are really re-engineering the entire hiring process through an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens. Some of that includes taking a very distinct look at what is the composition of hiring panels and ensuring that hiring panels are as diverse as possible. The next action team is service delivery. And service delivery is great at work, and they have presented a bunch of policies. Two of those are policies APX 680 from the ACA 1557. It's the non-discrimination in the administration of all MDHHS program services, including services administered by contractors, and number 2, policy APR 211, which prohibits all forms of discriminatory harassment of all MDHHS staff. The second highlight by service delivery is work on MDHHS contract process. They have integrated a non-discrimination in the MDHHS contract process and utilization of the contract RFP equity tool to ensure that all of the contracts are not causing disparaging impacts on any marginalized individuals or groups. The next action team we have is culture and climate. Two of the highlights, definitely. One is the GARE assessment that gives us a baseline understanding and measure to help us identify ways in which we will focus our future efforts. Another one is the intranet page from MDHHS, giving employees a place to stay informed and involved. And we have a specific DI page that I know the next presenter will talk about. And lastly, Culture and Climate has continued to find ways to recognize and share DI work across the department. That includes efforts like the DI newsletter that I'll speak on, SharePoint site, Hope Weekly, town halls, etc. Training and professional development. Two of the last outcomes we've been able to accomplish include the DI glossary, which really the focus and purpose of that is to standardize a shared DEI language for MDHHS operation, knowing that if we don't speak with the same framework, we will probably be confused or acting in different ways. So we do want to formalize and standardize that as a first step to normalizing this conversation. And secondly, we have developed a couple of debrief sessions, facilitated debrief sessions, to accompany the DI policy trainings of introductory training to health equity, as well as systemic racism. We're planning to roll those out at the beginning of next fiscal year, which is coming soon in October. Lastly, leadership. Leadership has created a leadership toolkit for doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So I cannot encourage leaders to look at that more, and that can be found at the MDHHS intranet website. The leadership team is also charged with making recommendations to the DI Council, as well as the large administration at the department in regards to DI efforts. And they are planning, as we speak, the next and first, actually, DI Middle Managers Leadership Conference in 2021. So that's very exciting to look forward to. Next slide. Here are the required DI trainings that we have proposed in the last 2 years. The first one is APR 500. APR 500, it includes 2 trainings. One is health equity, and the second one is systemic racism. There is a link right below the policy, all of which is hyperlinked, and you can access it if you wish, to instructions on accessing and completing the trainings. If you have any questions, you can look at that 2-pager for guidance. The 2 mandated computer-based trainings are in compliance within a fiscal year cycle. So we will start the first year of compliance at the end of this fiscal year, starting with fiscal year 2020. And there's a hierarchical process of really ensuring that that compliance is met. So supervisors and managers document their workforce completions, and they are to report it in performance annual evaluations, as well as report it to the Bureau or Administration's Director, who then in turn can report it to to the Office of Equity and Minority Health. We used to be called Health Disparities Reduction. And there is an entire process that you can follow in the policy itself. The next training is countering bias in hiring. This training was rolled out at the beginning of 2020 and is effective as of March 1st of 2020. It requires all members participating on an interview panel in MDHHS to complete countering bias in the interview training. HR is keeping a spreadsheet and tracking this completion of the training. The next slide includes some information on what Director Gordon mentioned at the very beginning, and that is on the Equity Impact Assessment tool. The Office of Equity and Minority Health has adapted the GARE tool, and they are rooted in race equity. We have opted to call our tool Equity Impact Assessment, just to follow the principles of being rooted in race equity and not exclusively so that we can account for intersectionality in our approach. The systemic process of 6 questions is a way to vet and debias our decision making in proposed policies, programs, practices, and budgets. And it helps us identify, assess, and mitigate intentional or unintentional positive and negative outcomes so that we can ensure ultimately that we integrate explicit considerations of equity in our decision making. Next slide. The purpose really here is to analyze root causes. And the Equity Impact Assessment tool has been proven with great evidence of helping analyze root cause of disparities and inequities across social and health contexts. And that is really in order to reduce, eliminate, and prevent inequitable outcomes. So first, very quickly, we will, through the Equity Impact Assessment tool, respond to root causes of social and health inequities. There's rich evidence of this. This is just a fact. Secondly, there's a solid body of evidence and research that demonstrates that this nation and many others, but this nation operates through systems of privilege and oppression that have existed for centuries. So these operations can be explicit or implicit, but ultimately they produce disparate and unequal outcomes for racial, ethnic, and other marginalized populations. One example is racism, which again, Director Gordon mentioned at the very beginning. Number 3 is bias. Bias is baked into all facets of society and operates both individually and institutionally. So without a very intentional approach to debias our thinking, we will default to continuing to perpetuate some of the historical ways of those systems of advantage. And lastly, targeted approaches are really what are needed in order to include marginalized populations' voices instead of assuming that a universal approach can benefit everyone without being really intentional and deliberate about the specific needs within populations. Lastly, and before I turn it over to the next presenter, we have the DI newsletter and Hope Weekly. So all of this information that you see in front of you is on the DI webpage, and you can find it there. Some of the highlights are that we have published 2 editions already, and there are 2 more to come. Within the DI newsletter, there is an opportunity to participate as a podcast storyteller. So if you would like to do that, there's an interest form that is hyperlinked here. And we look forward to continuing the dialogue with you about ways that we can reinforce and continue to educate and normalize a culture of DEI. Those are some of the purposes of having a specific DI newsletter. Everyone should be receiving this newsletter, so we encourage you to take a look and engage with us in our ongoing engagements around DI. For Hope Weekly, we would like to note that after today's town hall, there will be an ongoing Hope Weekly article related to DEI for 5 consecutive weeks, and Ray can definitely jump in and correct me if that's wrong. And then we will have as well another publication once a month after that to reinforce, again, our engagement on DEI. So without any hesitation, I'm going to transition us to the next presenter, Erin Frisch.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Erin Frisch. I am the co-officer of the DEI Council with my partner, Michelle Harper, who is here today as well. And my job is to ask you all for your effort in this process. So next slide, please. So the first thing we want to make sure you're aware of are the resources that are available to you. You've heard us talk multiple times today about the intranet site. We have a little handy picture if you're a visual learner like me. And the links that are provided here are links to the site itself, and then the DEI Digital Library is a great place to start if this is all new to you. And that library includes movies and videos, articles, books, podcasts, lots and lots and lots of resources to help folks get started if they're new to this work. And so I highly encourage that resource that the Office of Equity and Minority Health has spent time putting together. And then the third link you'll see there is for the training and professional development materials that have been pulled together by the action team. And that includes, again, books and articles and resources, but it can also include actual classes and trainings that you might find helpful or interesting. So that's the first ask. Please go check out those resources and get yourself educated about the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide. Our next ask is get involved. All of the action teams are open and willing to take new members and are actively incorporating and orienting new members onto the teams. We do ask you to fill out a very brief application. There's a picture of it there for you to see. That helps us make sure you get put on the action team that you are best suited to or most interested in. So it is not intended to screen anybody out necessarily, but just to make sure that we have the information we need. So I put a picture of that in there in case people are thinking application means something hard. It's really not. Next one. Then if you have any questions at all, or just need to talk through some stuff, or you're wondering and you don't want to, you know, you're worried about maybe embarrassing yourself, or you don't know how to quite have a conversation you might need to have, any of the council members are happy to talk through any of these issues with you. You can see from the list we have representation from many, many different areas of the department. That is intentional. That is part of the inclusion piece of our work. And if you see that there's your area is missing, I encourage you to reach out to the DEI Council mailbox and to your area leadership to see if we can't get you added to the council, because we really do want that to be well represented of all of the places in the department. And then finally, next slide, the DEI action plan. So you heard us talk at the beginning about how there is a department-wide action plan. We are encouraging every area of the department to use that as a model and a basis and come up with their own action plans for their areas. So as an employee, first thing you should do is ask, do you have one? And if you do, ask to see it and read through it and ask how you can be part of implementing that action plan. If you find out that your area doesn't, then get involved in creating one for your area. DEI action planning is not an external force coming outside of your area to tell you how you should do it. This work is very much intended to be organic from the folks that you are all working with to create something that is meaningful to you and addresses the pain points in your specific area. So it can't be done without employee engagement. So I encourage you to get involved if you need to. We've created a repository for action plans from around the department. So for those areas who have already created their action plans and you want to look at them as a model or a resource, that is available to you on our DEI intranet site. And then if you have any questions at all about getting started or how to do an action plan, you can definitely reach out to the council, and the DEI mailbox email address is listed there. And we would be happy to support and coach folks through that process. I just did a really lot of asks really fast. So I hope you caught all that. Definitely reach out if we can answer any questions. And with that, Ray, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Erin, and to all others. Great. Thank you, Erin, and to all other presenters. We appreciate you taking the time. As Yesenia mentioned, we will have a focus of DEI and Hope Weekly on a weekly basis the next several weeks, and then moving into having a focus each month. So to Erin's point, that's a lot of information. However, there will be follow-up information so you can learn how you can get engaged. We're now going to move into the Q&A portion of our town hall. We've received several questions already. Thank you to those who submitted. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we're going to try to get to as many as possible. For those we're not able to get to, there will be a follow-up through Hope Weekly addressing those questions. And if you have a question after seeing the results today, you can email that question to the DEI inbox, which is MDHHS-DEI@michigan.gov. So I encourage you to do so. So let's go ahead and jump in. First question we've received from an employee, and this is a question I think for Yesenia. The question is, changing our culture will take investment. Before we can have strategies to change, we need to understand how marginalized communities are impacted. What are the plans to continue to train us on what racism, ageism, ableism, and other isms really are, and how to conduct business in a way that doesn't do further harm?
Thanks, Ray. And I will time myself 60 seconds. So thank you for your question. It is very important to, again, normalize everything that is happening around the efforts of DEI. In a nutshell, I'll say first, we are conducting some development currently from Training and Professional Development Action Team, as well as other supporting bodies like OWDT, the Office of Workforce Development and Training, as well as the Office of Equity and Minority Health, who are partners in this work. And everyone is putting their grain and their piece of the puzzle to really incorporate more learning into our efforts. There is a plan that has been endorsed by Training and Professional Development called Equity and Cultural Competency, and it really encompasses a list of training topics that include isms, systems of oppression, as well as, in addition to education, tools that we can utilize for bringing those concepts into action. Thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Yesenia. Another question we have, and I think this is a question from Mike DeRose, who's joining us as well. This employee asks, we need to get more intentional around hiring. What are some things we can do right now to make sure we are hiring folks who hold values of DEI?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. It's a great question. I'm Mike DeRose. I'm the Director of Human Resources, and I also serve as a co-lead for the recruitment, hiring, and retention team, along with Sophia Hines. And in both spaces and collaboratively, we're trying to take an approach of implementing more of a DEI lens on the hiring process. So Yesenia gave a great example earlier about the implicit bias, unconscious bias training that's required. The beauty of that and the way we're trying to approach this is now it's a requirement. It's part of the process. So in order to sit on a panel, we are tracking it and making sure people have taken it. So we hope it'll have a lasting effect. We're also looking at ways, kind of top to bottom, that we can work the DEI work into the hiring process. So we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but things like having more diverse panels, maybe utilizing technology to allow for more of that, looking at repositories of questions that will allow us to figure out what people know about the DEI work and what they feel about the DEI work, through the application and interview process. So it's a work in process, a work in progress, but we're excited to keep working and improving.
Great, thank you, Mike. Another question from an employee, good question around leadership, and we'll bring Dr. Brady into the conversation, who's also on the DEI Council. This employee asks, many leaders want to be able to address current events, but don't know how in a way that's helpful and doesn't make things worse. How are leaders being supported to have conversations about race and racism?
Hi, thank you, Ray. That's an excellent question. One of the things that we have done within the department is reached out to the co-officers, Michelle and Aaron, and to our training department with Stacy Gibson, and decided that in our department, where my boss, Chuck Jones, is orchestrating and had orchestrated a town hall meeting around these issues, and we decided that we would incorporate also our employee services program. We wanted to make sure that we got it right the first time, because we only get one opportunity to really show our staff that we're really trying to work on our systemic racism and race issues within the department. So they came to the table with us and had a nice conversation with us as to how we should move forward. And we also did some research on best practices and lessons learned. And I think that was really awesome that we just took our time to make sure we got it right. And we brought that town hall meeting to the forefront, and it went over very well. We asked staff in advance to forward us questions. We let them know they can ask us questions afterwards. We gave intentional information about how we plan to move forward in this endeavor. And so our goal, our next steps, we have already implemented our action teams and have decided that we like to move forward in potentially affinity groups. And if you'd like to know more about that, please reach out to the council. They have already given you an array of tools that you can use. The toolkit is an excellent resource. I sit on a leadership team with Alicia Edwards, and we co-lead that team together. And I just want to say, I'm sorry to be rushing through this, but I want to make sure everyone else gets an opportunity. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Brady. We'll turn to 2 more questions from employees. Next question, and Aaron, I'll toss this to you. This employee asks, what does all of this mean if you are white?
Okay, you gave me a really big question and 60 seconds to answer it. I will do my best. For me, what I think is really important to remember, if you're white and you want to engage in work around race and racism and equity and inclusion, is that your experience is not everyone's experience. I used to think that just because I worked with people of color and had people of color in my neighborhood and my kids had them in their classrooms, that our lives were pretty much the same. And I have since learned that the systems that exist make their lived experiences very different from mine, even when we are in the same spaces together. So for me, that means as a white person, it is my job to believe people of color when they tell me about what life is like for them, and not question, not try to tell them that they are misinterpreting, not play devil's advocate. I have a good friend who tells me the devil has enough advocates. And so my job as a white person is to listen and to learn and to recognize that helping others get to equity doesn't mean less for me.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. Wonderful job addressing that question in such a short amount of time. And the last question, and we'll bring in Brant Wimbush into the conversation as well. I think this is a good question given his leadership in the service delivery action team. This employee asks, some of us, quote unquote, seasoned professionals have been asked how much longer before we plan to retire. Or our retirement has been hinted at, which seems odd and more than a little disconcerting. Do the efforts toward greater diversity, equity, inclusion within MDHHS include anything associated with age, or are they just race related?
Thank you for that question, Ray, and way to put the pressure on me to sum that question up in 60 seconds or less, but I'll do my best. Yes, the short answer is yes. The work and efforts toward MDHHS becoming a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive department does include ageism, as well as quite a few of the other isms. You know, the department's DEI work has really allowed us as a council to design policies that prohibit all forms of discrimination and discriminatory harassment for all MDHHS staff. Our policy that Ms. Yesenia mentioned earlier today, policy APR 211, states that the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services affirms its commitment to creating a work environment that prohibits all discrimination and all discriminatory harassments for all its staff. And, you know, within that policy itself, you know, there are a number of factors mentioned as far as groups that fit into that non-discriminatory framework. And age just so happens to be the first one listed, you know. And so what I say is this, is that I'm sorry if someone in the workplace has made you feel like, you know, devalued due to age. But please know that the department itself prohibits all forms of intimidation as well as discriminatory harassment. And if that does so happen to you, that, you know, you can easily file a complaint by completing an MDHHS 5519 and reporting it directly to the labor relations manager, or you can email that complaint directly to MDHHS-discriminatory harassment at michigan.gov. Please note that the complaint will be kept confidential without any retaliation and with fairness provided to all parties involved. And also one other thing I'd just like to mention, that if there's any complaints of discrimination that's being filed, please make sure that that complaint is filed within 180 days from whence the incident has occurred, so that it can be addressed in a very timely manner. So I hope I was able to answer your question, and thank you for it.
Great. Thank you, Brant. And for those questions we were unable to get to, expect to see responses in Hope Weekly. You can also email the DEI mailbox and find a link in the chat function for this webinar. We'll toss it back to Director Gordon for closing remarks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ray. Thank you so much to all the members of the council who made this a terrific town hall. I learned a lot. I'm sure others did as well. We have a long way to go, but we are on our way. And I just want to close with one thought. We talk about equity for a lot of reasons, and one of them is making sure that each of our colleagues at the department is treated with respect and dignity and has the chance to make the most of themselves and to achieve their fullest potential. So there's that individual dimension. But I think equally it's about what we achieve together. I think as long as racism, as long as stereotypes, as long as the many isms that Brant was talking about are in our midst, they hold back individuals and they hold back what we can accomplish together and what we can do for the people of Michigan to reduce disparities, to improve health, to expand opportunity. And I think that is why all of us are here. So that's part of why I'm excited about this work. It's part of why I'm excited about continuing the conversation that we had today. Thank you all for joining, and wish you all the best. We'll talk soon.